So what we're going to do today is talk about the skeletal system. We're going to do the bones. All right? Let's see if this works. All right. You should have learned from Unit 2 when we talked about tissues, okay? Bone is osseous tissue. That's the word we use to describe bone. Bone is a type of specialized connective tissue, just like fat, just like cartilage. It's a type of connective tissue, and it's the main element of the skeletal tissues. All right, so that's what we make our bones from. Connective tissue makes up the skeleton. It is composed of basically a living component, which are cells. My eyes don't ever work. Living cells and basically a hard extracellular matrix, what we consider bone. So you have something alive and something basically dead. It's unlike any other connective tissue because it is hard. And it becomes hard because it becomes calcified. So think about blood. It's not hard. Cartilage is flexible. Fat is very soft. Bone's the only one that is hard because it has calcium in it that makes it very dense and very hard. Now, bone has several functions. The first one is support. Without our skeleton, we would just be blobbed on the ground. So it basically gives us our structure. It's our scaffolding. So it holds us upright. For protection, think about the cranium. It's protecting the skull. It's like a helmet for your skull. Your spinal cord basically is encased by the vertebra. Your heart and lungs are encased by the rib cage. So it acts as a protective mechanism. It allows us to move. It's basically what the muscles move. Your muscles move your bones. So it acts as a lever for the muscles to work upon so that you can actually move something. It acts as a bank for storage. What do you think it stores? Calcium. Calcium and phosphorus, actually. Whoops, wrong way. Calcium and phosphorus, so minerals. So it's a storage bank. And most people, when they think about, you need to get plenty of calcium in your diet, why do we say we need to get plenty of calcium in our diet? For what? Strong teeth and bones is what we usually say. But there's another reason. That is an important reason, but there's another reason why we need a lot of calcium. And that has to do with muscle contraction. And when we learn about muscle contraction, you're going to see how important calcium is and what its role is. So muscle contraction, and for the nervous system to act properly. So for the nervous system to conduct, you've got to have calcium, and for muscle contraction, you've got to have calcium. So we use it for strong, healthy teeth and bones, but more importantly, the nerves and the muscles need it. Now, another function of the bone is what we call hematopoiesis, and that's just where you make your blood cells. So when you make red and white blood cells, that's called hematopoiesis. And that occurs in the bone marrow, so the cavities inside the bone. Another function is a place we can store triglycerides, kind of like a fat, and we use that for energy storage. It's kind of another way to bank energy. You can store fat inside the bone marrow and have another reserve for energy. Now, when we talk about the bones, we divide them by location, and we'll do this in lab. We're going to divide them by location. Let me draw my little skeleton, because y'all know how awesome I am at drawing. All right, so basically you have two main groups, the axial skeleton and the appendicular skeleton. The axial skeleton is basically the head and the trunk, consisting of your vertebra and your ribs. The appendicular are the appendages, the arms and the legs. Let me go to this next picture. Anything that's in brown is axial. Anything that's in this lighter tan color, that's appendicular. So an axis is something that you pivot upon. So think you can turn around in the middle of your body. Your backbone is your pivot point, and then your appendages are the things that hang off, your appendicular. Now, part of your appendicular skeleton includes your shoulders and your hips. And we call the shoulders the pectoral girdle, And we call the hips the pelvic girdle. Now, why do you think we call them the girdle? What does a girdle do? Hold you in. So the pectoral girdle basically holds your arms onto your trunk, and the pelvic girdle holds your legs onto your trunk. So that's where they get their name, the pelvic and pectoral girdle. All right, we also have some cartilages associated with the skeleton. I'm going to cover those in just a second. But basically the same cartilages we covered in Unit 2, hyaline, elastic, and fibro, and we're going to talk about those in just a second. Now, these cartilages have no blood vessels or nerves, okay? So think about your cartilages. Remember, they're avascular. Bone is what? Avascular or very vascular? Bone has a lot of blood vessels. So which one would you expect to heal better? Bone. Bone heals better than cartilage. So cartilage have very little blood vessels, very little nerves. It's a type of dense connective tissue, okay? And it has a layer of what's called the perichondrium, and that does contain blood vessels so that you can get those nutrients to the cartilages. So it has there's blood vessels around it, just not inside the cartilage. So it can get some supply, but it's not very good. Okay, 3 types of skeletal cartilages: hyaline, elastic, and fibro. Just kind of review from Unit 2. The hyaline are the most abundant. You have them pretty much everywhere. They're mostly for support. They do provide for some flexibility. Elastic cartilages are similar. You don't have as many. There's really only 2 places in the body that you have it, and I'll show you those. But they have recoil. They go back to their original shape. So your ears are elastic cartilage, so when you spring them, they spring back to where they were before. They go back to their original shape. And then fibrocartilages have lots of collagen, and they're very strong. So you're going to have fibrocartilages anywhere where there's going to be maybe a lot of stress or a lot of shock. They're basically great shock absorbers. Shock absorbers. So where do we find them? Let's go back to that picture. Start with hyaline. Hyaline are the blue ones. You'll notice that hyaline cartilage is everywhere. Anywhere you've got bones coming together, okay, anywhere you have a joint, you're going to have hyaline cartilage. You're going to have it just about any of your joints. It's the cartilage, we call them costal cartilages because costal means rib. It's the cartilages that connect your ribs to your sternum. The cartilage that makes your nose is hyaline cartilage. The cartilage that makes up your larynx and goes down your trachea and into your bronchioles, all that is hyaline cartilage. Okay, so it's everywhere. Elastic cartilage, the green, is found in 2 places. Your ear and your epiglottis. You may want to know what the epiglottis does? It keeps food from going down your trachea. So basically when you swallow it, it closes off the trachea so the food goes down the esophagus and not into your lungs. So those are your 2 types of elastic cartilage. And last but not least, you have fibrocartilages, and these are those really, really strong ones. And you have them in your knee. It's called the meniscus in your knee. All these cartilages between the vertebrae, those are fibrocartilages. Because think, when you're pounding, when you're walking, your back is constantly taking in all that shock absorbing, is taking off all the pressure that you're getting when you make walking or running movements. So every vertebra has a fibrocartilage between it. You also have it here. This is called the pubic symphysis. Little piece of fibrocartilage that basically holds your hips together. Now in females, that particular cartilage is responsive to hormones, and it will stretch. When do you think it would respond to a hormone and would stretch? Birth. When you're late-term pregnancy and you start to need to deliver the baby, this cartilage will actually soften some so that the birth canal can widen and the baby can pass through the birth canal. Now, it will go back, but not quite where it was before. That's why your hips are a little bit wider after birth than they were before, okay? Because it's already stretched a little bit. Doesn't have quite the recoil that the elastic cartilages do. So that's our 3 types of cartilages. So make sure that you can name or know where you can find those. Basically, you only have to remember that elastics in the ear and the epiglottis. Fibrocartilages are in 3 places: the knee, the pubic symphysis, and the vertebra. Everything else is hyaline cartilage. So if I ask you what kind of cartilage do you find here, the answer is probably going to be hyaline cartilage, because it's pretty much everywhere, unless it's those specifically named places: the ears, the nose, in the ears, the epiglottis, and the backbone. Okay, how do we grow cartilage? How do we make cartilage? We use chondrocytes. Okay? Chondro means cartilage, cyte means cell. So these are your cartilage cells, and they secrete a matrix that becomes cartilage. All right? So these are the types of cartilage growing cells, your chondrocytes. Now, cartilage will become calcified for normal bone growth. The way you make bone, and we're going to talk about this in detail on Thursday, the way you make bone is you lay down cartilage first, then that becomes calcified, and that becomes bone. So you have cartilage first, then you have bone. So you have to have cartilage, you have to have chondrocytes to lay down the cartilage in order to get bones. As you get older, some of your cartilage also begins to calcify, which kind of gives you that decrease in flexibility. Your cartilages aren't as flexible anymore because they're becoming harder. Now, let me give you a hint for Thursday's lecture. If you will go ahead and watch 2.2 A and B, that is basically the physiology of how bone is made. And Dr. Ansardi goes into a lot of detail on that, and I'm going to kind of hit the high points. So it would really help you a lot if you'll watch that video before I lecture, so that if you're confused about something, you can ask me. Okay, so if you'll go ahead and watch 2.2 A and B before class, that would be awesome. Okay. When we talk about bones, we classify them by shape. And this is going to be something we'll do in lab as we go through. We're going to talk about how we classify these bones. We have long bones, we have short bones, we have flat bones, and we have irregular bones. The long bones are longer than they are wide. So if you'll kind of keep this shape in mind, think like a dog bone. If it's shaped like that, it's a long bone. Now, that doesn't matter if it's a really long bone like a femur. The bones in your fingers are also shaped like that. Okay, they're longer than they are wide, so they're also long bones. All right, so I've got a picture. We'll go over some of the different bones. Short bones are like cube-shaped bones. They're kind of square bones. All right, and you also have something called sesamoid bones. That actually comes from the word sesame seed. They're seed-shaped bones, and the biggest example of that is a patella. And they're actually bones that are laid down inside of a tendon. The bone is actually inside the tendon. And some people will have a sesamoid bone in their foot, kind of an extra bone, and usually you'll have to have it removed surgically. But we all have the patella. We all have that sesamoid bone, and then some people have some extra sesamoid bones. We have flat bones. They're thin bones, and they're usually a little bit curved. Example of that is the sternum and the skull. And then you have irregular bones, bones that are kind of got funky shapes. Example of that are the vertebra, which my vertebra always looks like a Teletubby. I don't know why, but it does. So, irregular bones. Let's go through our skeleton and talk about these different bones. Okay, so here's our skeleton. Flat bones. You're going to find them, they're flat, usually curved. Sternum and in the skull. The cranium especially are your flat bones. Long bones. Longer than they are wide. So your humerus is a long bone. Your radius and your ulna are long bones. All the metacarpals and phalanges in your fingers and your hand are long bones. Your metatarsals and your phalanges in your your feet are long bones. Your humerus is a long bone. Your tibia and fibula are long bones. So any of those are considered long bones. They're longer than they are wide. Short bones. These are those kind of squarular, funny shaped, kind of cube-shaped bones. You see those in the ankle, in the foot, in the wrist, in your carpals, your patella. Those are all short bones. And then the irregular are kind of the funny shaped bones. And the common ones are basically the ones that make up your vertebra. Okay? And there are also a few in your cranium. Ribs are also flat bones. So in your worksheets in your lab guide, we talk about, determining which ones are long, which ones are short, flat, and irregular. And we'll do that more and more as we go through lab as well. Okay. When we talk about bone, bone comes in two flavors, okay, based on how it looks or the texture of the bone. We have compact bone, which you'll also see called lamellar bone. And we have spongy bone, which we also see written sometimes as cancellous bone. So those are two words you'll see associated with those types of bone. And I may use that question on the exam. I may use the word lamellar and compact interchangeably, and spongy and cancellous interchangeably. So you need to know they mean the same thing. Compact bone is a very dense, strong bone. Spongy bone is a honeycomb. It's kind of like a little honeycomb looking. And it's made of what are called trabeculae, which are little T-shaped bones, and I'll show you a picture of that. Again, we're going to talk about this more on Thursday, so if you'll watch that 2.2, you'll get a whole lot of information on compact bone and spongy bone. All right, so this is an example. This is in the skull, okay? And this is basically all bones have both compact and spongy bone in them. They have a little bit of both, okay? They're either mostly compact or they're mostly spongy, but they usually have both in them. So this is a cross-section of the skull. This layer is compact bone. Okay, this dense bone on the outside. And this honeycomb-shaped bone, this is the spongy bone. So basically this is a bone sandwich. You've got spongy bone with a compact bone on either side. Sometimes you'll see the word diploid associated with spongy bone. That's a more scientific name. I will not use that term. I will use spongy bone or cancellous bone. But if you do see that word, that's what it means. Spongy bone is made out of trabeculae, and just think T. They're basically these little T-shaped bones that are all laid kind of randomly. These are all little T's that make this honeycomb appearance, and that's how you get spongy bone. And we're going to talk about how that's made again on our next lecture. Okay. Let's talk about long bones. We're going to talk about the structure of bones. Now, we're going to talk about the structure of long bones, the structure of flat bones, short bones, and irregular bones. Let's start with long bones. This is the dog bone one, remember? They all have what's called a diaphysis and an epiphysis. Y'all say diaphysis. Epiphysis. All right, so make sure you can spell that. No F, it's P-H-Y. Diaphysis and epiphysis. The diaphysis is the shaft. This is the diaphysis. The epiphysis are the ends. So these ends are the epiphysis. The diaphysis basically has compact bone around a medullary cavity. So it's compact bone around a cavity. And inside that cavity, that's where you find marrow, okay, bone marrow. Inside that medullary cavity, you're going to find the bone marrow. Now, in adults, that marrow is yellow. It's basically for energy storage. It's fat. In children, you have red marrow. And what do you think it's for? Making what? Blood. For hematopoietic. It's hematopoietic. It makes blood. Now, adults do have some red marrow because we do need to continually replenish our blood supply, but we don't have to make as much as children do because they're making more as they grow. So they have more red marrow than we do. So as we get older, our amount of red marrow goes down and it's replaced by this yellow or fat marrow. And all that can be found inside the shaft or the diaphysis. Now, the epiphysis, these are the ends. And they're full. They have compact bone around the outside of them. Remember, most bone has both things. So it's compact bone around the outside and spongy bone all in the middle. So it has a spongy bone interior. You also have what's called an epiphyseal line, and let me go to the next slide, and let's show you this. All right, so here's my picture of a bone. Here's my diaphysis, my shaft, and you can see you have compact bone around a space or a cavity, and the cavity is where the marrow is. The epiphysis, these widened ends, they have that compact bone with spongy bone in the middle. But another thing to remember we talked about proximal and distal? Each bones are going to be proximal and distal. The end that's closest to your trunk is going to be the proximal end. The end away from your trunk is the distal end. So when you have an epiphysis, you'll have the proximal epiphysis and you'll have a distal epiphysis, the side closest or furthest away from the trunk. Each side also has articular cartilage around the ends. That's hyaline cartilage. That allows the bones to move against each other freely, okay? So it's basically a surface to allow the bones to articulate together. The epiphyseal line is right here. It's between the diaphysis and the epiphysis. And you probably know this as the growth plate. That's what we kind of call it in layman's terms. So the epiphyseal line is the growth plate. And this is where the bones grow. So you may have heard of a child with maybe especially a baseball injury, where maybe they've thrown the ball and twisted their arm and broken their growth plate, and the bone won't grow anymore. And we're going to talk about how that works later in Unit 2, but that's where that is. This is the line between the diaphysis and the epiphysis. All right. Associated with the bone are some membranes. You have a periosteum and an endosteum. And let me kind of show you the picture first, and I'll come back to that. This is your bone, okay? You have a periosteum. So peri means what? Around. Osteum is osseous or bone, so around the bone. So it's the membrane that goes around the outside of the bone. You have an endosteum, and that's the layer or membrane that kind of is inside the bone along that medullary cavity. So you have periosteum around it, endosteum inside of it. Let's talk about what's associated with the periosteum. The periosteum is basically a really tough fibrous layer on the outside. So it gives its support. It gives strength to the bone. Makes the bone strong. Okay? You need that. When you look at the periosteum, it's got two layers. It's got an outside layer and an inside layer. This outside layer is where it's really, really strong. This inside layer is basically where you've got cells, where you've got living cells that help contribute to bone health. And these are the cells that you find on the inside of the periosteum. You have osteoblasts, osteoclasts, and osteogenic cells. Now you're going to need to remember which one of these do what. Osteoblasts make bone. Osteoclasts break down or destroy bone. Now we can all kind of figure out why you would need osteoblasts, because you're always repairing your bone. You break a bone, you're remodeling your bone, you're growing. We know why we need osteoblasts. Why do you think you might need osteoclasts? Why would you want to break down your bone? To get the calcium out. That's how we release the calcium. By breaking down the bone, we're able to release calcium. And we have osteogenic cells. Basically, these are precursor cells that give rise to other cells. They're stem cells. Our nerve fibers are in this layer. We have blood vessels associated with this layer, lymph vessels, and we have what are called Sharpley's fibers, and this is what basically gives it the strength. Gives it strength by attaching the membrane to the bone. Now, the endosteum is inside the bone, and it also contains osteoblasts and osteoclasts. So basically, you're able to work on the bone. You have bone building and bone destroying bone cells on the outside of the bone and the inside of the bone. Here's our blood vessels. These are the Sharpley fibers that connect the periosteum to the bone. Here's the medullary cavity with the bone marrow in it, and the periosteum and your endosteum. Okay, Now that was a long bone. What about short, irregular, and flat bones? They also have a periosteum. They also have an endosteum. Okay? The periosteum covers compact bone, covered by compact bone, and the endosteum is covered with spongy bone. Let's show you a picture of that. So here's your spongy bone, and it's going to have the endosteum and periosteum. Where's my, well, and between this endosteum and periosteum, that's where you find the bone marrow. So whereas on the long bone, you have the marrow inside that cavity, in spongy bone, the marrow is just in all these spaces. You find the marrow in all these spaces, and the membranes basically line all these little cavities inside the spongy bone. Now this is a little bit review. Where is that hematopoietic or red marrow tissue? Okay. It's a difference in between adults and children. In adults, we have red marrow to make blood cells in the head of the femur and in the head of the humerus, in those trabecular cavities, so that's in that in here, in the heads, in the epiphyses. That's where you have the red marrow. All the stuff in the diaphysis is yellow marrow. And you also have red marrow in the sternum, okay, inside those trabecular cavities. So if you're an adult and you're going to have a bone marrow transplant, you need a bone marrow donor, and you hear that say, okay, we're going to get the bone marrow from your hip. What they're talking about, they're going to go into the head of the femur with a needle and extract the bone marrow, treat it, and then either spin it down or do whatever they got to do to give it back to you or give it to someone else as a transplant. So it's a pretty painful procedure. But we do have red marrow because we have to make more blood cells. So usually it's in the head of the femur and in the head of the humerus. Now in adults, in children, in infants, all the medullary cavities and all the spaces in the spongy bone, anywhere where there's a cavity or spongy bone, you have red marrow. They don't have yellow marrow as children. As you get older, that red marrow is replaced by yellow marrow, which is fatty. All right, a little more about those different types of cells. And we're going to look at a few of these in lab, not this week. We'll start on some of the microscope stuff next week. I'm going to give you a break from the scopes this week. We have osteogenic cells. They're also called osteoprogenitor cells. They're basically stem cells. All right, they're stem cells that become something else, and they become osteoblasts. Osteoblasts, again, are the bone-forming cells, and I'm going to say this over and over and over again until when I say osteoblast, you know I mean bone-making, bone-forming, and when I say osteoclast, you know it's the other, breakdown cells. You have osteocytes. These are mature bone cells, and osteoclasts are your breakdown cells. And this is going to come into play when we start talking about calcium regulation. So you're going to need to memorize osteoblasts and osteoclasts. All right, now, one more time to kind of review. We have two types of osseous tissue in a bone. Okay, so I've already shown you the compact bone here, the spongy bone, the compact bone. Now, this is a long bone. You've got your compact bone, you got your spongy bone, and the epiphysis. I want you to notice the difference. This has got those little T-shaped things in the spongy bone. In the compact bone, you have these little circles. Those are called osteons. I'm going to go to the next picture and I'll come back. This is compact bone. Compact bone is basically made of little tree rings, like little concentric rings. And each set of concentric rings is called an osteon. So I need to make that go away. Each set of rings is called an osteon. So you have this one, inside of this one, inside of this one. This whole thing together is an osteon. Now a lamella is one ring of the osteon, so one layer. So you have compact bone, which is made of stacks of these concentric rings. Each concentric ring is a lamella. inside each osteon, okay, is what's called a Haversian or central canal. So this is a Haversian or central canal. And that allows you to get, it has an artery, a vein, and a nerve in the central canal. And that allows you to get oxygen, carbon dioxide, any kind of nerve endings, whatever, to the bone. Now, because these osteons are going to lay side by side, you've got to be able to get blood from the blood vessels out in the periphery all the way through the bone. So you've got these other canals, they're called Volkmann's or perforating, that run perpendicular. And they connect an osteon to osteon. So this central canal and this central canal are connected by a Volkmann or perforating canal. Artery, vein, and a nerve. So let's go back. So on a compact bone, the osteon is a structural unit. And an old term is the Haversian system. You may see that. We're going to stick with osteon. All right? And each osteon is a group of concentric rings. Each ring is a lamella. And these are incredibly strong. They make columns that are really good at bearing weight. Okay? And in the middle of each osteon is a canal, a central canal or Haversian canal. You may see that. And it's going to have an artery, a vein, and a nerve. So the osteon's a structural unit. They have multi-layers, and they all have a central canal. Again, you've got those right angle canals, and they connect osteon to osteon. All right. Now, we have something called lacuna and canaliculi, and I'm going to go ahead and go over to the next slide to show you those. One more thing about these perforating canals. Think about your bone. All right. So you've got bone, you've got marrow in here. Here's your heart up here, okay, and your blood vessels are going through. If the blood vessel just came up to the edge of the bone, all right, and stopped, there'd be no way to have any kind of perfusion through the bone. So that's why you've got these little parallel or perpendicular, you have a parallel system with these perpendicular channels to allow blood to go all the way into the medullary area. And also, for the bone marrow, when you're making new blood cells, for those new blood cells to be able to exit the bone marrow, go through these perpendicular canals and go back into the blood. So it's just basically a transport system so that you can get things in and out of the bone. All right, well, now we're going to break down an osteon even more. So these osteon things are only on compact bone. Right, just compact. Wherever there's compact bone, you have osteons. So we're basically taking a cross section. Each one of these layers is a lamella. This whole thing together is an osteon. Here's your central canal with your artery and your vein and your nerve. Inside, you have osteocytes. That's this little cell, those osteocytes, mature bone cells. They live in a little space called a lacuna. Do you remember that from the hyaline cartilage? We had the glassy hyaline cartilage. We had the little air bubbles, which were the lacuna for the chondrocytes. Little cell homes. We have cell homes in the bone. So the lacuna are just the little spaces that the cells live in. The canaliculi, or the canaliculus, if you're doing it plural, are these little canals that connect these lacunae, or these osteocytes, to each other. So they're basically little canals that allow these cells to connect to each other. This acts as a transport system. So this is how, if you have oxygen coming into the artery, okay, how are you going to get that oxygen all the way to the outside of the bone? Well, the way it works is it goes into this osteocyte, then it travels through the canaliculi to this one, and then down this canaliculi to this one, then all the way out to the edge. Any waste products like carbon dioxide, okay, it's going to be transported down a canaliculi into another osteocyte in its lacuna, back this way, back this way, back this way, all the way to the vein. So it allows you to be able to transport things across a solid matrix through these little tunnels. That's what the canaliculi do. And we'll see those in lab too. All right, now that was compact bone. In spongy bone, Remember, you've got those T-shaped trabeculae. And they tend to align along lines of stress. Okay? There's no osteons. These T's are irregularly arranged. Okay? And they're full of capillaries. If you look at a bone, let's take, for example, the femur. This is a femur. All right. So if this is the body up here, all of the weight, think about, you would think the femur would be more like that, so that you could put all your weight straight down on a bone, right? But you kind of got this little precarious neck of the femur, all right? It looks like it would just snap like a chicken, right? Because it's kind of just sticking out sideways. It's really, really thin. Well, that's got a bunch of trabeculae, and there's a stress line there, and they line up to really strengthen that part of the bone. So it's actually a really strong bone, although you would think it would be a weak bone. So that's one of the examples of where you're going to see that trabeculae line up to keep that bone strong. And we'll show you that in lab as well. All right. This is just more of a review of the spongy bone. You've got your tuberculae, you've got osteocytes, and basically they're just going to be trapped inside these spaces. Don't really have the lacuna like we did in the osteons, just kind of in those spaces. All the spongy bone is going to have red marrow. Remember, red marrow is going to be in the spongy bone, especially in adults. And you're going to find this in all your flat bones, your epiphysis of your long bones, in your ribs, and in your vertebrae. All right, what is bone made out of? What do we make it out of? It's got a living component, which are the cells. Osteogenic cells, osteoblasts, osteocytes, osteoclasts. So that's the alive part. And then we basically have the dead part, which has an osteoid and the mineral salts, which we call hydroxyapatite. Not hydroxycut like the diet thing, but hydroxyapatite. Osteoid is basically a matrix that's made out of proteoglycans and glycoproteins. Don't get too caught up in those names. But basically it's a matrix full of collagen fibers. And it's kind of the scaffolding. So you lay down this scaffolding, and then you get this hardening by the calcium phosphate crystals. This hydroxyapatite, which is the calcium phosphate crystals, basically harden this scaffolding, and you get bone. So this osteoid is kind of the ground substance. It gives you your flexibility. Your hydroxyapatite or your calcium phosphate makes it really, really hard. All right, now I'm going to move on to one more thing before we go for the day. For you guys, especially that are coming into lab this week, I'm going to do a little bit of a review. Yes. On bones. It's kind of, I'm not going to go through all these slides, but I want you to know where to find the information. Okay, so I've put this PowerPoint together not so much for me to stand up here and talk to you about it, but to let you know where to find some of the information, some of the terms that you need to become familiar with. Because in lab, I'm going to start using these terms, and instead of trying to flip through your book and try to find all these terms, I've kind of compressed them into one place for you as a general reference. So hopefully make it a little bit easier for you. This part right here, this is basically review. We talked about the axial and appendicular skeleton. We know the axial skeleton is basically your trunk, your head, your vertebrae, and your ribs. Your appendicular, arms and legs. So that's review. What I want to go over are basically bone markings. Let me go down here. Not yet. Yes. Wow. It's going to be a fun video, isn't it? All right. Bone markings. When we talk in lab, okay, if you look on your lab guide, there are basically two columns for the bones. All right. There's a column that actually has the bone listed, and on the right-hand side, it has all the features or the markings. You are responsible for all the features and markings on a bone. If it's listed in the lab guide, you're supposed to know it. Now, there's a bunch more features and markings on bones that we don't require you to know, but if it's in your lab guide, you have to know it. So don't ask me, do I have to know that? If it's in the lab guide, you have to know it. So you have to know the bone and whatever particular features we list in the lab guide for you to know. And these markings have a purpose, and we point out some of them in lab to let you know what these things on these bones are doing. Y'all quit packing up. This class is over at 9:15. Bone markings. These bones have things like bulges, they have depressions, they have holes, and they all have functions. Some are places that you attach muscles, ligaments. Some are where joints come together. Some are actually holes for blood vessels and nerves to come through. And so when we talk about these bones, we're going to go through some of these different markings. Like I said, I've got these written in text for you. I've also got them in picture form to show you. Make that go away. Let's kind of go over some of these so that you can recognize in lab what you're looking for. Some of the words, because you've got to learn how to spell them and know what they mean. So this is just basically a place for you to find them. All right, things like trochanters. We're going to see that on the femur. These are large, blunt, kind of odd-shaped processes. They're usually places for large muscle attachment. So you think about the femur. You have these really large processes on the proximal end of the femur. Those attach large muscles, so it's a strong point on the bone. You have crests or spines. They're usually, here's a spine or a crest. They're usually some kind of a narrow ridge of bone. Tuberosities are usually some kind of rough area of a bone. This is on the hip. What you sit on, your sit bone, that's your ischial tuberosity. It's kind of a rough spot on the bone. Anytime you have a spine, it's usually some kind of process thing that sticks out. This is the spinous process in the vertebra. Your hip bone has a spinous process. Condyle. You need to go ahead and put this one to memory. A condyle is a rocker. I'm not sure why these are disappearing now. Is a rocker. So anywhere that you have something that allows this movement, that's called a condyle. If you have any kind of projection or process above it, it's called an epicondyle. And we're going to talk about those as we go through the bones. Let's see. Other words you're going to see. I got in some kind of funny loop now. I don't know what happened. All right, you have the head. So most bones have a head end, okay? You may have a facet. Anytime that you have a facet, that's usually where two bones come together. It's an articulation point. I don't know what I did. All right. You may have another condyle. So here's a condyle. This is the mandible. This is your jaw. That's the condyle. That allows your jaw to rock against your skull. Okay, so that's another word we're going to talk over and over and over again. The ramus, anytime you see the word ramus, that means it's an arm-like projection. So this is the little arm-like projection on the mandible. So it's like a little arm area. Other bone markings you may see. Meatus. Don't say meatus. It's meatus. And it's basically a canal. It's a passageway. You have the auditory meatus. It's basically your ear canal. It allows the sound to come from the outside into your head. Sinuses or any kind of cavity inside of a bone. If you have a fossa, it's some kind of a depression. Basically, like if you have a bone, I don't know why my pencil's doing weird. If you have a little depression, that's called a fossa. You may have a groove or a fissure. That's basically a slit-like opening or a little furrow. This one you need to go ahead and commit to memory. Not foramen. Don't say foramen. It's foramen, and that's a hole. Okay, so a hole through a bone. And these foramen are you have like several in your face, in your facial bones that allow nerves and arteries and veins to come from the inside through the outside to your skin. And we're going to point out some of those in lab as well. So these are the words you need to become familiar with. And like I said, I made this PowerPoint for you to kind of put it all in one place so that you could find it. I think that's all I'm going to do. I just want to let you know where it was. All right, so what I want you guys to do before you get to lab is make sure that you've worked